Welcome back to Piers Morgan Uncensored. She's the self-help author and Democratic presidential candidate who once said she would harness love to defeat Donald Trump. She believes the power of the mind may have prevented a hurricane hitting the United States in 2019. And she once wrote, "The sickness doesn't exist, and diseases like cancer and AIDS and other physical illnesses are physical manifestations of a psychic scream." Now, some of that she's walked back with a history of saying things that many may deem quirky at best. Does Marianne Williamson really believe she has a shot at becoming the first female president of the United States? Well, let's find out. She joins me now. Marianne Williamson, great to have you on the programme.
Thank you so much.
So I want to start with some of those things that you've said in the past. I know you've walked some of them back, but when you run...
I haven't walked any of them.
Well, I think you did when you talked about... You don't take any of it back.
It's not about walking them back. It's about pointing out how disconnected they are from the context in which any of those things were said. I never said that the power of the mind, these are all misrepresentations and mischaracterizations of what I've said. If you say I have to walk them back, it's as though I'm supposed to admit that I said something completely ridiculous. Nothing that I said within the context that I said it was ridiculous at all. That's all.
Would you say you regret any of those things that we referenced?
Not if you look at the context in which they were spoken, no. I shouldn't apologize for the fact that there is now an understanding of a mind-body connection. Anybody in any kind of a psychotherapeutic situation might say, "Ooh, I'm in such pain, it feels like my body is screaming." Listen, I have osteoporosis. My mother died of diabetes. My sister died of breast cancer. My father died of colon cancer. I have spent most of my career being of service to people with AIDS and other critical illnesses. No one needs to school me on the reality of illnesses and its ravages. I am not a woman who doesn't understand those things.
You are a woman, and if you were to win, you would become the first female president of the United States. And that does beg the question, the burning question, one that has tripped up so many famous people in the world of politics around the world. It's cost people their jobs. So let me ask you straightforwardly, what is a woman?
What is a woman?
Yeah.
Well, a woman, if you look at it only biologically, I wrote a book called A Woman's Worth. I am a woman who was born into a woman's body. I think of myself as a woman. But it's a different world today. People can define their sex, their sexuality, binary, non-binary, however they want. I just know what I am as a woman, so I'm not going to get trapped into any of that. We live in a free society. And in a free society, people can identify however they wish to identify, do whatever they do, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. And I have no problem with that.
What about when it does hurt, for example, female sports people who are suddenly seeing themselves come up against trans women who might be 6'4" tall and are powering past them in swimming pools? That does do genuine harm. What's your view about that issue?
That is a complicated subject, absolutely. But there are ways through muscle mass, through hormones, through chemical testing. There are ways to determine whether or not a particular race
though,
would be
as a female candidate to be president, you cannot surely think it is remotely fair for trans athletes. And I've got nothing against trans people. I've always supported their rights to fairness and equality. I just feel that this is completely unfair, and trans athletes should simply not be allowed to compete against biological females. End.
Those situations, once again, they're complicated. They're not all the same.
It's not that
complicated.
There are
officials. It is, actually, because there are some situations where it may be what you just said, other situations where it may not be. It's important that we protect the rights of the minority. It's also important that we protect the rights of the majority. So those things should be determined according to factors that are agreed upon by the sports officials, and all of the people seeking to be part of those races should be protected. Their rights should be protected and honored.
What would be the first thing you'd do as president if you won?
One of the first things I would do is determine that there would be an audit for the Pentagon, every cent that we spend there. I would cancel all contracts where the United States government has contracts with union-busting companies. I would deschedule marijuana from a Schedule I drug. I would bring together a group to have a very serious conversation about how we were going to get to universal health care, and I would also use the marching rights that are part of the Bayh-Dole Act of 1980, by which pharmaceutical companies are told that if you developed a drug with even $1 of taxpayer money, which means most drugs in the United States, that the government has the right to lower those prices. I would bring together a group of leaders who are the experts on childhood, everything having to do with the neurophysiology of children, neuropsychology, the needs of children in terms of health, in terms of education, everything that it would take to have the greatest experts on childhood, because I want to develop a Department of Children and Youth. I want a massive transfer of resources into the lives of children 10 years and younger.
Okay.
I want to
listen, this is all. Listen, I don't want to stop you, but I'm going to run out of all time. But okay, that all sounds very laudable. And you rattle them off. You've obviously thought about it a lot, which is good. What would you do, for example, as Commander-in-Chief if China invaded Taiwan?
That's a very, very difficult one. That's a very, very difficult one. And hopefully, if the day I'm president, China will not have invaded Taiwan. I will certainly not poke the bear. I would certainly try to walk back any of this almost Cold War type of conversation that is happening too much in this country between the United States.
What if you were Commander-in-Chief and they literally, as many people think is highly likely in whoever is the next president in that term of office, if they did invade Taiwan? Joe Biden has said he would be there to help. Would you?
What did you say that Joe Biden has said?
He said that he would help the Taiwanese if that happened.
Well, there are different ways. There are different ways to help the Taiwanese, and I believe that we're trying to help them right now. And one of the ways that we're also trying to help the Taiwanese is to build better relationships with China so that we can be more on a road towards healthy collaboration, which we will need, not only economically, but in order to deal with the climate crisis in the years ahead. So let's right now work on where we are. Let's not poke the bear. Let's take the temperature down. Let's think in terms of China, not as an enemy, but as a collaborator, hopefully someone that we can compete with in a healthy way.
The trouble
That's
is,
what my attention
Marianne,
is on.
well, I say this with great respect, but people will say that's very naive, that we've just, if you did that attitude with, say, Vladimir Putin, that's not going to stop him invading countries. And people look to America, for better or worse, as the global policeman. And if you want to run the country, you want to be the boss, you're going to face some very tough decisions about what you do when the bears actually go and do bad stuff.
Thank you, Paris. I understand what the role of the Commander-in-Chief of the United States is, but there was nothing naive at all about what I just said about China. And the last thing I'm not naive about is Vladimir Putin.
Joe Biden has said he won't debate other Democrat candidates in the primary season. Many people think that's just cowardly. What's your view?
Of course he should debate us. There are 3 candidates for this nomination. There is not an enthusiasm in this country, as you were mentioning earlier. There is not an enthusiasm for a Trump-Biden rematch. The majority of people have said that they wish the president would not run again. If the American people hear his agenda for the next 4 years, and they hear my agenda for the next 4 years, and the agenda of anyone else who is running, and they say, through their votes in a Democratic primary, yes, I think Joe Biden is the best candidate to win in 2024 and the best leader for the next 4 years, then God bless him, he should be the one. But the idea that the DNC and the Democratic elite establishment can just shoehorn him into the nomination is undemocratic. If you have a party, which we do, that likes to think of itself as a champion of democracy, we should not be so wary of democracy in our own house. So it is important that the president debate me.
I completely agree. I suspect he's quite afraid of debating you, actually. What do you make of this issue of the Biden family and all this foreign money from adversaries, which appears to have been pouring into their coffers?
Well, it appears to be. We don't know yet. The facts aren't all out. We have rules of due process in this country, and no one, whether it's Donald Trump or President Biden, should be above the law. We'll see what happens, but no matter what happens, this is certainly a shadow on his candidacy, and one more factor for people to think about in terms of a president whose approval ratings are already very low. So there's Hunter Biden is not his father. We don't know. We don't know anything yet. But yeah, I mean, this is not great going into a presidential race. All the more reason why the president should be debating me and anyone else who is running, so that we can present to the American people who get lost in all this. This is what is so wrong. As you were speaking about earlier, it's like a circus of smut and racehorse and gossip. We need to think about the American people who are lost in all this. The American people, 1 in 4 of whom have medical debt, 18 million of whom cannot afford to pay the the pay in order to fulfill the prescriptions that their doctors give them. Half of our seniors live on less than $25,000 a year. We have a third of our workers who live on less than $15 an hour and cannot even pay for a place to live. These are the people who are looking at all of these institutions and saying, you're failing us. You're not doing anything for me. And that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about an economic U-turn in this country.
Final question, Marianne. Should somebody who's just been found guilty by a jury of sexually abusing a woman, should that person be allowed to run for president?
Everybody needs to vote for, well, right now they can legally. So every voter has to choose for themselves. But I'll tell you something. This is not about, listen, people who are total Trump supporters, like the person that you had on earlier, she doesn't care. They're not going to care. That's not what's going to lose for the Democrats in 2024. The power of Trump is not what's going to lose for the Democrats in 2024. What could lose for us, however, is droves of people staying home, particularly young people who are not going to go to war for a president who approved the Willow Project and has given more oil drilling permits than even Trump did, and who do not see in any way regarding their health care, regarding their capacity to go to college, regarding these college loan debts that are shackling them. They don't look at the Democratic Party and feel they have my back either.
No, I think you're right.
That's what is dangerous for the Democratic Party in 2024. All the people who might be staying home unless we present them a genuine opportunity, a genuine alternative of economic reform and a whole new face. And obviously, I think that face should be me.
Obviously, you think that face should be you, and you put your case very compellingly. And it's great to have you on Piers Morgan Uncensored. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Getting very interesting, that race in America, just on the Democrat side with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and now Marianne Williamson, both polling surprisingly strongly against Joe Biden. May not be a given that he ends up being the Democrat candidate. That would be a bombshell. Oh, the Sex Pistols, one of the all-time great anarchic bands. You can listen to that all day. Fortunately, we've got one of the men behind it. Johnny Rotten, John Lydon, the great man, here live.
Peace.
Unleashed, great to see you. We're going to be doing a regular catch-up with you called Johnny's Rotten World, because the last time he came on, it popped so well on YouTube. Everyone was watching this. They love your unvarnished, uncensored view of life.
Well, I like to tell it as it is.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not influenced by the media.
Yeah.
But they are very seriously influenced by me.
Yes. You just come, you're rehearsing with your new band Pill today in London.
Yeah, I'm straight out of rehearsal, so forgive me if I look a bit sweaty and moist. The girlies apparently like it that way.
Can I ask you about politics for a moment? Because you said something quite interesting in the last few days. You talked about how it used to be the right that was seen to be the completely intolerant fascists who never allow people to have different opinions and so on. And now it's gone full circle.
Oh, it's absolutely.
To the left.
Swings and roundabouts now, isn't it? I can't trust anything coming out of Labour anymore. I've begun to despise them.
Really?
Yeah, it's this woke agenda and all of this nonsense. I can't be tolerating that. You know, I'd rather vote Conservative because at least I can rely on their hypocrisy, but I don't want to vote for lunacy. Just plain and simple.
When you see the debate over Boris Johnson and these parties, really at the core of it, it's just that they were all partying in Downing Street when they were telling everybody else, you can't go and see your dying relatives in hospital.
Yes, that white man speak with forked tongue, you know?
Do you think he's a liar, Boris?
Oh, completely. You know, if you're going to write these laws in and insist on them and then deliberately go and break them yourself, well, that kind of hypocrisy is just a little unfeasible for me. So sod him, you know. He's like all politicians, really, a professional liar. But by God, that bloke Bone you had on there defending him, wow, what a piece of work. He reminded me of that old Tory kind of creature that I used to really, really hate and loathe. So, you know, get rid of both of them and things might be on the look up. But on top of that, I would like a Prime Minister that is capable of partying, but then don't be introducing laws that you're not going to follow yourself and expect the rest of us to oblige to that.
It's the hypocrisy is the problem.
Oh, it's wicked, wicked. I wish I was at that party, though.
I think you'd have livened it up. What do you mean? We're in, obviously, Jubilee week, and God Save the Queen was this iconic anthem at the time. It was all about anarchy and so on. You've softened a little bit over the years. Is that right? Say about the Queen in particular?
No, this is the media again trying to take the detonation out of the H-bomb I dropped on that song. I'm as solid about monarchy and my dislike of it as I ever have been. To me, I've always viewed the royal family as a bunch of German and tourists with a Greek thrown in, you know. But as a human being, right, she ain't a human being as representing a state. She doesn't represent me. I don't want to pay no more tax to keep that institution alive. But I totally respect her as a real person, that she has endured that and maintained, yes, a sense of dignity in it. And I'm always attracted to pageantry. This is, you know, I grew up loving me Arsenal, and if we weren't waving our flags, that's as close to pageantry as you can get.
There's also something, I just think when you look at the way politics has gone around the world, really, it's so much corruption, so much hypocrisy, so much, you know, really incredible characters getting to run countries. And you think, at least in the Queen's case, you've got this woman who's barely put her foot wrong. She's dignified, she's humble.
And so
she's
I respect all of that.
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's like, it's almost, if you just view her as a sort of calming figurehead for the country, she's been one of the most impressive people that we've ever had, I would say.
Yeah, but God bless, if she kicks the bucket, what's going to follow?
Well, that is a genuine problem. I mean, tonight we had the Archbishop of Canterbury saying that, for example, we should now be looking to forgive people like Prince Andrew, that he's shown that he wants to make amends for what he did. But my issue with that...
First of all, find him guilty before you forgive.
Right.
And the Archbishop of Canterbury, I mean, I'm sorry, but that has the ring of child molester about it.
You mean in terms of the way the church...
The church, all of these institutions. And, of course, they all cover themselves up. But, as I say, first find him guilty of something. It's obvious he's hiding something. I don't trust him.
And when you have the Queen's son, who pays millions of dollars to a woman who was accusing him of having, in America, underage sex with her and being involved in sex trafficking with a paedophile, when he does that, having said, I'm going to fight this and clear my name, even though he didn't, even though there was no guilt attached to this settlement, the fact he's had to pay millions of dollars, what does it say?
A settlement is telling you everything. It's almost like a bribe to go away, isn't it? Now, the poor lady in question, I mean, she knew what they'd like. They'd rip her apart in court, is basically, you know, so take this cash underhand. It's victimisation again, and if that's going on in the future royal family, I don't want none of them.
Can you forgive somebody in this circumstance if they don't accept what they did? I mean, we don't even know what he actually did because he won't say. Can you offer forgiveness if people don't show any atonement for what they may have done?
No, there's a holier than thou about it. I just won't be tolerating. There's something there. Just bring it out, wash your dirty laundry in public, and let us be the judge of that. Right? Not underhand deals going on. This is the continual world they're introducing us into, isn't it? Complete corruption. Well, I'd like to see a brave new world.
I do think it's caused uncalculable damage to the royals, because I think that we've never had a situation where the senior royal has been involved in a settlement like this. And it's not like it was a sort of financial issue.
I think we have seen royals in the past histories are definitely involved in all manner of...
I think in modern times is what I would say. And it's a serious matter. You know, Jeffrey Epstein was a disgusting billionaire
it's
paedophile.
not to be treated lightly.
No, not at all. And my real issue with it is that Andrew carried on seeing that guy after he admitted and was convicted of paedophile behaviour.
Yeah, and there's all manner of money laundering possibilities lurking in the background.
Right.
That too.
Like, why did he carry on being his friend? You know,
well, this is my taxpayer money. It's that's being spent.
Right.
You know, bugger off.
Right. No, but I think that's a legitimate reaction that most people have to it. What do you think about the Jubilee celebrations? Are you going to get involved? Are you going to be in a street party? Are we going to see the man who sang God Save the Queen singing it with love and affection?
Why not? I love the party side of it. Right?
Yeah.
and that...
And the pageantry and everything.
The pageantry and the flag waving and being part of a wonderful bloody country. I've got no shame, but plenty of pride about Britain, and I'll wave the flag any way I like, safety pins included.
Do we talk down the country too much, John?
I think so. I do. That lady's done no personal harm to me. The institution has, and it's obviously riddled with corruption. You know, I just pity what comes after her. I've got no hope for it. I think we should really start voting on a new queen.
Really?
Yeah, let's have an election.
Who would you fancy, Meghan Markle?
Oh, someone from Australia.
I want to ask you about something else, Top Gun. So I got very excited yesterday about Top Gun. I went to see Top Gun. I loved the new movie. I loved the first one. And to me, it restored masculinity and being a man.
Yes.
Do you see anything in this?
Well, I'll tell you, there's a shortage of modern war movies, right? And you do need those kind of characters, really, if your country's going to survive any threats of invasion. You need proper blokes to sort it out. And trying to sweep that under the carpet with this new era of woke is unacceptable to me. We need men's men. I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is.
And this idea that masculinity itself is wrong.
Oh, toxic.
Yeah,
eh?
It's all toxic.
Yeah, I'll have a vodka and toxic masculinity, please.
Yeah, but it does annoy me. Because, of course, there are some men who are toxic. But there are also many men who can show masculine qualities, which actually not only are good qualities, but women like men to be masculine.
Because that's human nature.
Right.
Right? And to go against nature really shows like a major flaw and a weakness in the idiocy that's coming from extreme left politics. I find it very, very alarming that young students are so quick to jump on this like a name slurry business without really thinking the thing through.
But also, I think the idea that students...
But they're all dressed as men and women themselves.
Yeah,
but they're arguing against
But this idea that a minister can go there who's only said that he believes a woman is an adult female, and for that he has to be hounded with abuse. Because you actually have Labour MPs now, women MPs, saying, actually, women can have penises.
Well, of course they can. That's how you get babies.
But I sort of feel the world's gone mad a bit.
If you're working against nature because of some new political fandangled theory, then you're a bit of a fool. And I'm afraid the young are very, very foolish in this, and I must say not all young. Just those who've gone through the university systems. They seem to not be educated anymore. They're really institutionalised.
I want to play... We do a little segment called World's Gone Nuts.
Most of them should be in an institution.
we do a regular thing called World's Gone Nuts. I think you're going to like this story, John, because this is actually something we normally do at the end of the show. I'm going to play it now. Watch this. The World's Gone Nuts. Now, this is a love story that might not take off. It involves 22-year-old Sarah Roeder, who lives in Dortmund, Germany, and she's announced that she's in love with a Boeing 737 passenger jet and has plans to wed said jet. The future Mrs. 737 identifies as an objectum sexual, meaning she's attracted to inanimate objects and has 50 replicas of the flying love machine. Unsurprisingly, it's not legal to actually marry a replica aircraft in Germany, but neither the law nor common sense to stop other people from doing things like this. In 2007, Erica Labry married the Eiffel Tower, changing her last name to Eiffel. And Kate Cunningham has been happily married to a tree for nearly 3 years. But true love never does run smoothly. Poor Akihiko Kondo, who married a hologram character, has been left devastated after the expiration of the software meant he could no longer talk to his wife. John, when you look at stuff like this, in a way, it's a kind of wonderful thing that there are people this mad out there, right?
I think so, and I find that entertaining. But the shocking one, really, for me, was the girl fondling the 747 model. I mean, that's one up on a battery-operated penis, isn't it? And God bless her, if that's what turns her on and rings her bell, you know? Bong.
John, I could talk to you all night. Fortunately, we've only got to wait 2 weeks till you're back on. It's been brilliant to have you on Piers Morgan Uncensored. You are as uncensored as it gets. And thank God for somebody who just speaks their mind and doesn't care what all you cancel culture wokies say, because you can't cancel a Sex Pistol, right?
You certainly can't. And I'm on tour with Public Image Limited to prove it. Y'all come on down now. Shut your mouth. Yes, sir. Everyone a winner.
John Lydon, brilliant to see you.
Bye-bye from my man breasts.
We will have Johnny's Rotten World every 2 weeks from now on, because I cannot interview this guy enough. This is what we want in life. Plain talking, straight talking, uncensored.
It's so easy to just tell the truth.
Isn't it? It is. And yet it's not easy for a lot of people. And I thank God people like you are doing it, and I'll do it too. And hopefully we'll put the world to right. Good to see you, John.
Well, one last thing on Boris. Rules are for fools, and he's proved the point by breaking his own.
I think that probably perfectly sums it up. Under the previous employment section of his CV, my next guest lists soldier, diplomat, charity CEO, award-winning travel writer, Harvard professor, and most recently Britain's top podcaster. But his role as politician is the subject of his new book, Politics on the Edge, which records in full, uncensored fashion the complete omnishambles at the heart of our British political system. Well, making his uncensored debut, I am genuinely delighted to have probably the most liked politician in Britain. But the bar is low, Rory Stewart.
The bar is very low.
Let's start with that, because you've got out of politics.
Mm-hmm.
Many people, a lot of my family, wish you hadn't, wish you were right in the front line of the thing. Why did you eventually just say, I'm just done with this?
I met the end with Boris Johnson. I mean, that was the end for me. And I put in a good 9 years. I'd been a cabinet minister. I liked Theresa May. Thought she was trying to do the right thing. But I really thought that Boris Johnson was a dangerous thing. I thought he was a shambolic clown. I thought he was going to be very damaging for our constitution. And
he was.
And I felt he was, yeah.
I mean, that's exactly how he turned out to be. I mean, you were very prescient in your assessment of him, which led you to leave. I guess the problem is, if people like you don't want to stay in our system, it's never going to improve.
It's a difficult balance, isn't it? It's a really difficult balance. You put up with a lot, you work out how much you can put up with, and at some point you have to be like, enough's enough.
You're quite direct about some of our former leaders. Of Theresa May, she had some of a monarch's stiff authority, not necessarily a negative, I guess. David Cameron, later in Kabul, you write, he came across like a host at a pheasant shoot, rented only for the day, courteously presiding without any particular desire to know about the detail of the soil on which he was standing or about the professionals whose job it was to drive the game. I mean, a real picture of superficiality there from that Prime Minister.
Yeah, I thought that when I came in, that one of the things that struck me first, and it's probably something you see a lot and the public sees a lot, is fundamentally a lack of seriousness. It really has become like a massive campaigning communications game. And there isn't any time really to talk about policy. You would have thought that secretly they might take their masks off and they get around the cabinet table and they're like, OK, enough with going out to the media. What do we really think about this? But it happens so rarely.
I mean, the worst by miles of all your stories, it might be the worst thing I've read in a long time. Liz Truss, and you write this, back in London, Liz Truss asked me how my weekend had been. I explained that my father had died. She paused for a moment, nodded, and asked when my 25-year environment plan would be ready. I read that and I thought, I can't believe I'm reading that. And then I thought, yes, I can believe I'm reading that. Because Liz Truss always exuded an air to me of somebody who probably would behave like that.
Yeah,
without a shred of decency or basic humanity.
No. I think she's a very unique human being. I worked for Liz Truss, I worked for Priti Patel, I worked for Boris Johnson, and it was a real education.
But that moment.
Well, that was very sad for me. I mean, obviously, I love my father deeply.
Of course.
And I was, but I think that's more awkwardness. I think she's somebody who.
But that's not awkward. That's just a total lack of basic humanity and manners, isn't it?
I think she's somebody who doesn't relate very easily to other people. And maybe I'm psychologizing too much, but yeah.
Rishi Sunak you call Machiavellian. Why do you call him that?
I think probably because I sensed... I used to sit next to him in the library in the House of Commons, big kind of wooden library. and he was my library partner. So I was quite fond of him. But I didn't quite get why he'd suddenly gone hard for Brexit. And particularly, even when I got round that, and I understand many of my friends voted Brexit, I couldn't get round him getting in behind Boris Johnson so hard. Because he'd seemed to me quite a sort of thoughtful, serious...
He seems the kind of serious guy you're talking about.
Yeah, he does.
But I agree. If I
does.
was talking to him, which I do occasionally, the Brexit thing, I didn't understand why he would be that supportive. And I agree about Boris. I guess if Boris is the leader, you either fall in behind or you do what you did and just get out of it, right?
But he fell in behind pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason I found it difficult is that it was the MPs who made it possible for Boris. Because if you remember in this leadership contest, you needed the MPs to vote for him first. And basically, there were a whole middle group of MPs, and you'd say to them, we know him very well, we've worked with him, I'd worked with him in the Foreign Office, we know that he doesn't really pay attention, we know he's pretty careless about a lot of stuff. You don't really think he'd be a good Prime Minister, do you? And they'd say, no. So why are you supporting him? And they'd say, because he's going to win.
But hasn't politics always been full of charlatans and unprincipled people? And if we accept that that's a bitter reality, not all, I've met some very decent people in politics, actually, but it's not entirely surprising that people like Boris Johnson, Donald Trump and others, in a televisual age, the ones who can crack a joke and make people laugh, who have a little bit less of the robot about them, and people thought Theresa May was robotic. It's not entirely surprising that they rise to the top and have a constituent that will support that.
No, it's not surprising. Politics always had charlatans and bluffers, and I think we, people like me from the kind of centre ground of politics, have a lot to answer for. I think 2008 financial crisis showed that we'd mismanaged the economy. I think Iraq and Afghanistan were horrible foreign policy humiliations. And so I think people like Trump or Johnson are responding to a genuine public anger. These guys screwed up. They didn't know what they were doing. The problem is what people are choosing to do is throw them like a hand grenade at the system.
But, I mean, in Trump's case, it's effective. He just tears up any rules that have gone before. He doesn't care. And he has a constituent audience that don't really care what he does or what he says.
Yeah, I think it's true for both of them. But I think that to counter that, there's always going to be people like Donald Trump or Boris Johnson around. What's lacking is the seriousness in the kind of middle ranks of politics. And that's why I think the system feels so broken.
What do we do about it? How do we fix it?
I think we have to decentralise. We have to take power out of Westminster. I'm very excited by, the Mayor of Manchester, Mayor of West Midlands, and Mandy Street. And I think we've got to get out of this Victorian idea that a bunch of amateurs sitting in Parliament are going to be able to micromanage the country.
You were a tutor to Prince William and Prince Harry. So what do you feel about what's happened with those two?
So I don't talk about it. It's the one
thing I know, that's why I've asked you.
Yes, it's the one thing
the show's called Uncensored, Rory. Don't come on here and start self-censoring. What's the matter with you, man?
I think if I'm teaching them, I owe them...
But just on a human level.
Owe them confidentiality. I like them both very much. They were lovely boys.
Do you feel sad about what's happened? They now hate each other so much they don't even talk to each other.
I definitely feel sad, yeah.
Is that as far as you're going to go?
As far as I'm going to go.
Who was the brighter?
As far as I go.
Well, you were their tutor.
As far as I'm going to go, that's not my job.
From a military perspective, when I watch Harry doing his Invictus Games thing, I think good on you. When I think about his service to his country, I think good on him.
Yeah.
My brother-in-law taught them both at Sandhurst, actually. I thought they were both good soldiers. When I see him, the other half of him, running around the world, trashing his family and the monarchy and everything, I can't stand it.
Yeah, I sympathise with a lot of what you're saying. I'm a big supporter of the King. I'm a big supporter of the Prince of Wales. I'm very proud of the royal family, and I think that's very, very sad.
Should he stick to stuff like the Invictus Games and just shut up trashing the royals?
I'm staying out of this one, Pete.
You effectively just said you agree.
Huh? I agree with a lot of things you said.
As his former tutor.
You're dragging me too deep.
You'll sell some books here, Rory. Come on, bit of uncensored honesty. Let's take a break. I want to talk to you after the break. It's 9/11 anniversary today, and I want to ask where you were when it happened, but also it prompted you to go on this extraordinary 2-year walk through Afghanistan and other countries. I want to know why you did that, what you learned, what we should all learn perhaps from that period. That's after the break. I'm back with Rory Stewart here, the uniquely popular and liked British political figure. Luis Rubiales, I wanted to ask you about that because everyone's talking about this. this guy.
And you've managed to get an interview with him.
Yes, so I've got a big interview with him airing tomorrow night. We got the first interview, and it was very interesting. He was very open, very frank about it. He said, look, I was an idiot. I shouldn't have done it. What do you feel, though, about him potentially facing a criminal prosecution now for the kiss?
I actually quite sympathise with the lady at the end there,
Grace,
who was saying that it's quite possible that the woman at the time might not really have felt very much, but that afterwards you can feel very, very disturbed. I mean, look, it's very difficult to judge. Spain, different mores, different cultures, but I think you've got to be pretty careful about that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's an interesting sign of the time that it's created such a furore, actually. 9/11, it's the 22nd anniversary today of 9/11. I remember where I was. I was lying on a sofa recovering from back surgery and was supposed to be lying there for 3 weeks. It was about 8 days in. I got a call from the Daily Mirror newsroom. I was the editor. I got straight in my car and drove to Canary Wharf, not even thinking that that might be a target itself. It was the most extraordinary day of my career and obviously horrendous in so many ways. Where were you when it happened?
I was walking across Asia. I'd been walking for about a year and a bit, and I didn't understand what had happened. I met a guy sort of probably a couple of days after 9/11, and he started trying to explain to me in Nepali. He said, you know, it's this tower in America, and this plane hit it, and I thought this guy was crazy. I literally...
So you had no awareness of it at all?
Processing these words, but I was like, it's like he's telling me there's been some sci-fi attack in New York. So it wasn't until the 18th September I was arrested and accused of being an Al-Qaeda activist up on the Tibetan-Nepali border.
You are the least likely Al-Qaeda activist I probably ever met.
So this is what I said. I said to the policeman, I said, I'm not a very likely Al-Qaeda activist. And he said, that's exactly why I think you are. It was like Inspector Clouseau.
The walk that you were on, and you carried on for a long time, you did 2 years in the end. It's an extraordinary thing to do, to just walk and walk and walk and walk. What was the motivation for that?
I had been briefly a British soldier, then I was a diplomat. And I felt that I was locked behind these embassy walls. And we were getting involved in these other countries. We had no idea what was happening. So I walked across Afghanistan just after 9/11. I walked through the winter of December, January, February, March. Just the Taliban government fell. And it changed my life, changed me as a politician, changed me as a diplomat, because I saw the gap between these villages I was in, where women had not been more than 2 hours walk from their village in their lives, where I could see drugs being traded, people with guns. And then I turn up in Afghanistan, in Kabul, and I hear the British government and the American government saying, every Afghan wants a gender-sensitive, multi-ethnic, centralized state based on democracy, human rights, and rule of law. And I thought, I can't even translate that into language they understand. So my life was changed. I mean, 9/11 was a horrible event, but it defined the next 10 years of my life. I was in Afghanistan, I was in Iraq, I was working to advise the US government, and I was trying to stand up against what I saw as the madness of how people were responding.
When you see what's going on in Afghanistan now, with the Taliban just obviously taking back full control and oppressing women again in their millions, terrible poverty, what is the answer? I mean, Tobias Ellwood got into hot water for, it was a very clumsy video he put out, but the central message that we should start engaging again with the Taliban, did you have some sympathy with that?
I did have sympathy with that, because the truth is that when we sanction people like the Taliban, we don't change their behavior. They're not trying to go shopping in Harrods. All you end up doing is punishing the Afghan people. These are some of the poorest people in the world, very, very difficult to feed themselves over the winter, people selling their own organs to feed themselves. So I think we can find ways of providing assistance to the Afghans without going through the government, and sanctioning the government just makes the area poorer and more unstable.
And when you look at Ukraine, there's a sort of growing sentiment amongst some Republicans, to my surprise, in America, that America should yank the support, spend it at home, not on this latest foreign conflict. What's your view of what's happening there? I mean, do you think Ukraine can win? Is it incumbent on the West to ensure they can win? How far do we get involved?
I fear that Ukraine is getting like the Iran-Iraq war, which dragged on for 8 years. I think we're underestimating Russia's depth and strength and the nationalistic sentiment. I think it's going to be very difficult for Ukraine to break through the front lines, and even if they do, I don't think Russia's going away, and I think the threat to Putin isn't from the left, it's from the right.
You tell a story in your book of how, as an MP, you thought about killing yourself over a story of your constituents' trousers that went viral. You gave an interview where you said some of the farmers in the more remote parts of his constituency hold their trousers up with twine. He got picked up and he's accused of being of being a posh Tory who thinks his voters are country bumpkins.
Yeah, it's a strange thing, looking back at it over 12 years. I can see now that I was completely overreacting. What I'm trying to be honest about, I suppose, is as a new MP coming in, you feel a very special relationship with your constituents. I was very proud of Cumbria. I was very proud of the work I was doing. I said a stupid thing to a journalist, and suddenly it looks like I'm slagging off my own constituents. And I really felt everything had ended. I sort of felt...
It's extraordinary that you would feel it so deeply. I mean, how close did you come to acting on that impulse?
It's the only time in my life I have felt like that. I was walking down the street and I saw a lamppost and I thought, maybe I should hang myself on this lamppost.
Are you serious?
Yeah. Yeah. It's the only time in my life, but it was... And I think it shows something...
Because you felt you'd broken that bond of trust with the constituents?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is about the way that you exaggerate relationships with people, but I felt that an MP with their constituents is like a priest or a doctor. You have a very special relationship, and that if you break it, you're breaking your vocation.
You know, I mean, I read it. It was a startling thing to read. I have to say, though, in the context of the point you're trying to make, I do want more politicians to feel that seriousness about that bond of trust with the electorate. Because if you don't have that, if you treat the electorate with the kind of casual triviality that Boris Johnson did, or the recklessness that Liz Truss did, or whatever, I think if you do that, democracy slowly starts to die. And if we don't have a strong democracy in this country, I don't know what we're left with.
Thank you. And I think what I'm trying to do in the book, in Politics on the Edge, is to show, yes, a bit of humour, but above all to demonstrate that there is a big, big problem, that this is no way to run a government, and that we need to reform. We need to reform our electoral system. We need to reform ministers going in and out every couple of months out of their jobs to have a serious country.
And you know what else we need, Rory? We need you back in the game. You may not want to do it, but actually I think you should.
Thank you.
You going to?
I think about it.
It just made you think about it
No, it has made me think about it more, and it's made me think that probably the way back in maybe is more local. As I say, I'm very envious of mayors. I thought about running to be an independent for Mayor of London, and that's still something I think about a lot.
Politics on the Edge. It's a fascinating, it's actually a pretty scary book, actually, because you lift the lid off what we all fear is lying underneath in our parliamentary system, and it's got to evolve and it's got to change. We need more people with your intellect and seriousness, I think, than we currently have, and that would help enormously. Rory Stewart, thank you.
Thank you.
And being uncensored. Well, I'm joined now by Iman Ayton, who's organised her own Black Lives Matter protests, including the likes of actor John Boyega and Madonna, and royal historian and author Sir Anthony Seldon. So welcome to both of you. This is a really incendiary debate now. Never used to be. It used to be just everyone used to agree Winston Churchill was a national hero who saved us from the Nazis, and that was it. But now he's not. And I'll start, Iman, by saying this. I understand why young people look back at some of the things that Churchill was recorded as saying, some of the views that he held, and I understand why it may colour the judgment about him, literally, actually. But I also believe you should take all great figures in totality.
I agree.
Whether it's Gandhi, Mandela, Churchill, whoever it may be. And the welter of positives for Winston Churchill, to me, outweigh attitudes and occasional comments which were by far the norm of that era and wouldn't be tolerated today. And what's your reaction to that?
I totally agree with you. So I don't actually harp on the covert racism or the kind of, the comments like black people are savages and Indians are a beastly race. I don't actually hold on to that because you're right, it was during those times, not that it's acceptable. We can safely say it wasn't. What I hold on to, for example, is yes, he was a hero. I think I was given the same kind of narrative that most people were, that this is a British hero. Admittedly, it was only when I saw Churchill was a racist, that graffiti that was written on his statue during Black Lives Matter, that prompted me, as a random person, to say, you know what, I'm going to go home and research Winston Churchill. And in doing that, I found the two things that resonated with me personally. The first was the 4 million Indians that died due to the Bengal famine, which was a direct result of Winston Churchill's decision-making. The second would have to be... Hold on.
No, okay.
Fair enough.
But on that, I'll come back to you, because that is simply not true.
OK, you can tell me
the mythology
why.
that's built up around what happened, and I'll let the great historian fill in the blanks here, but there's a lot of mythology that's been fermenting about Churchill's culpability over the Bengal famine. Apart from anything else, he didn't cause the famine. The famine was caused by a cyclone. It was then massively exacerbated by a failure to get resource and food into the area because of the war and because of Japan's stranglehold on the area, and so on and so on. Churchill did direct other countries, including America and Australia, to try and send grain to Bengal. But he also prioritised, when it really came to it, British troops who were going to die of hunger as well. And as a British Prime Minister in a war, I'm not sure you can necessarily blame him. Now,
which I've heard, and I totally agree with that.
So my point is that it's very easy to say that Churchill caused the famine and the death of 4 million people. But actually, when you get into the weeds about what happened there, that's simply not accurate historically.
Well, I said it was due to his decision-making. Secondly, that's not the only thing that resonated with me. The second thing that resonated with me, Piers, was the fact that he built Kenyan concentration camps. So please school me and tell me I am wrong. He built Kenyan concentration camps 7 years after World War II, 7 years after defeating fascism, 7 years after getting rid of concentration camps for Jews. He decided after 7 years of growth and learning and all of this peace and all of this amazingness that Britain has achieved, we're now going to build concentration camps. And not for Jews, this time it's going to be for Kenyans. And we're now going to start making pillars, these kind of different instruments that literally crush and rip the testicles off of Kenyan men. And we're going to do that 7 years after defeating Nazism. So, yes, I've got a different perspective.
We've heard the view, and it's a view clearly shared by a lot of young people. I mean, staggering, these new statistics now of people who really dislike Churchill and have no respect for him.
Well, I think it's partly the fact he was built up to be such a big figure. But for me, everything that has been identified that Iman is talking about is important and needs to be weighed into the equation.
Thank you, Anthony. That's all I want. That's all I want.
Because we are all mixtures of good and bad.
I agree.
Every leader. And I think for young people to have the evidence and weigh it up, I'm just going to mention 3 good things he did. And by the way, I agree the treatment of the Kikuyu tribe in Kenya during that period of suppressing Mau Mau was utterly deplorable.
7 years after World War II.
From 1952 onwards. But this is what he did. He did, on the welfare state, he was a core person building the welfare state before the First World War. And as Prime Minister in the Second World War, he oversaw the Beveridge Report and encouraged it. Which has been enormously to the benefit. Secondly, he was the first politician to spot the end of the Cold War. In 1953, he made an extraordinary speech after the death of Stalin, saying we can't carry on as we were. And thirdly, there was what he did in the Second World War, where Hitler, 6 million Jews, 50 million dead in that war, he did stand up when Britain was alone. So to give young people the evidence on both sides and let them come to their own judgment and to recognise that every leader, us, me, you, Piers, everyone, is a mixture of good and bad.
But not monstrous, and that's my issue. Not everyone is a mixture of monstrous and hero.
Well, you
so
say
good
that.
and bad is one thing, but being monstrous, deciding to actually crush and rip testicles
one of my
from black men.
All right, but take
Piers.
one of my heroes like Nelson Mandela. He was on the no-fly list for this country throughout most of the 70s. Right? He was a man that many viewed to be a terrorist. And then he came out and he turned out to be one of the all-time great peacemakers. Now, again, do you take his life in totality, Mandela, or do you say that actually anyone involved in any form of activity which could be classed as terrorism is a monster, and therefore there is no chance for a public figure to redeem?
Did Nelson Mandela sanction making pliers that crushed and ripped the testicles off of black men? Did Nelson Mandela do that, Piers?
What he did sanction was he sanctioned activity which by today's standards would be construed as terrorism.
But so we can safely say that, yes, everyone is good and bad. I'm not negating that point. The issue is,
my point is that you can take almost any historical figure and you can paint a picture, as Anthony said, of negative and positive. To me, what Churchill achieved in World War II overrides everything else.
But why, though? So why does that supersede the fact that he caused thousands, tens of thousands of black deaths, and potentially, again, it's arguable, but potentially his decision-making led to the deaths of millions of Indians? So what you're saying...
But that's not true.
Deaths, but what we can say categorically is what I said about the Kenyan concentration camps. So if you think that the Kenyan concentration camps wasn't monstrous, then what you're doing is you're negating the thoughts and feelings and experiences of everyone else.
I don't actually negate anything that Churchill did on the negative side. I think a lot of the things he said were certainly racially tinged at best.
But what about the things that he did? What about the pliers that I've just told you?
We're not defending that at all, right?
So and that's the point. We need to balance the argument. I agree with Anthony.
Yeah, but my point is,
argument
where
so
on right? But where? I agree. But where on your balanced argument does the pendulum swing to saving the world from the Nazis?
Oh, I agree. No, see, this is the thing. I'm not the extremist. I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Maybe you're used to those types of guests here. I'm not that type of person. I believe in balance. So I actually agree with you. I think he did incredible things. Okay. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that he also did really monstrous things. And we should present both arguments and allow people to establish how they
as indeed you have.
Okay, so the sheer fact that we're having this discussion now, that we are here able to talk, is because he led this country to stand up against a fascist dictator who, like many of the leaders in the world today, many want to, China, Russia, North Korea and more, want to squeeze free debate, the kind of discussion we have at the moment. We can go back, have our separate lives. We're not going to be put in
We wouldn't be having it under Nazi Germany, right?
I agree with you. I'm not disputing your point.
So give them the facts. And I think that perhaps it was inevitable. There was so much adulation of Churchill. There's now a steep... I mean, that's a really extraordinary figure. 80% of young people have a negative picture. I think that maybe in 5 years' time it will rebalance. I think myself will disagree, Imam, on this, that I think that it will be overwhelmingly positive about Churchill while not ignoring the downside. And I think if people can learn about humanity then, that people's flaws, including what he did or what he sanctioned as Prime Minister in the 1950s in Kenya, weigh all that, then that's real education. That's what history is about.
I mean, there are proper arguments to be had about the carpet bombing of Dresden in World War II, which many people think was completely unacceptable. Churchill would argue, if he was here, he's not, but if he was, he would argue it was a necessary evil to facilitate the hastening of the ending of the war. Now, a lot of people don't agree with that historically. But if you're a wartime leader, you've got to make horrendous decisions.
I totally agree with you. And I bring it back to just having an inclusive mindset. And I think that's the issue here, that many people seem to not, or let me just put it this way. I don't think people are disputing the fact that he's a hero. I think that many people are disputing the fact that he is also a monster. And that is where the problem lies, Piers. I'm not saying he's not a hero. Everything that you've just said, I agree. I think it's awesome. But I also have to take into account that the Indian population that died, potentially because of his decision-making, probably wouldn't have called him a hero. I have to take into account that the men that were having their testicles ripped from their bodies probably wouldn't call Winston Churchill a hero either. So again, it comes down to an inclusive mentality. When you take into account everyone's feelings, it becomes a lot harder to then definitively say someone is a hero or a villain. Okay. What you usually do is say they are both. You take into account they are racist, you take into account that they are a hero, and you take into account that they are
Anthony, final point on Churchill.
I think he sanctioned some monstrous things. Personally, I don't think he was a monster. I think he had a deeply...
So sanctioning monstrous things doesn't make you a monster. Is that right, Anthony? Let's just make sure you're clear. If you do monstrous things, you're not a monster. Is that correct?
I think that...
Is that correct?
Well, let me ask you a difficult question. Do you think the unleashing of 2 nuclear weapons in World War II at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, was that justified or was that monstrous?
I think those types of things are monstrous. Okay. Anything that kills anyone else is a monstrous act.
So you're calling the American president that did that a monster.
Anyone that kills anyone else is a monstrous act, whether you want to see it like that or not.
But that brought to an end a war that would have killed many, many, many more people.
But it still doesn't negate the fact that it was monstrous to the people that died. And that's what I'm trying to say, that you're now putting your feelings and white people's feelings and Jewish feelings and British feelings above everyone else that had a negative interaction with this man.
See, I think you let yourself down when you say
No, it is.
that.
White people, British people, Jewish people, the people that I typically, this is where I'm coming from, the people that I typically find defend Winston Churchill. There have been many black, let's be honest with ourselves here, but I typically find it's majority white because we have this real kind of admiration for the man. And so a lot of people...
Well, quite
really
rightly,
do-
because he saved us from Nazi Germany.
But we have to take in consideration that he
I don't
was
think
a
anybody
monster
thinks
and
that Winston
racist.
Churchill... Nobody thinks he was an angel at all. But he took a lot of very difficult decisions.
But they're
where
not
these
negating,
decisions...
but people are negating the fact that he is a monster. That is the issue. Be balanced.
All right,
Here.
you made your point.
Balance.
You made your point. Anthony, I want to just talk to you quickly about your book. The Path of Peace, Walking the Western Front Way. Couldn't be more timely, obviously. Remembrance Sunday this weekend. When you wrote this book, have we learned the lessons that led to the catastrophe of the First World War, do you think?
So, no, categorically not. I mean, as I was walking that, the Third World War was in Ukraine, perhaps about to unfold. It was the vision of a young soldier Piers who, uniquely it would seem, had a vision on building a path to peace, which I think is fundamental, where we can have people, his vision was of all nations or all faiths or backgrounds walking side by side together to try to learn from the dead from both sides. So I walked back last summer 1,000 kilometres, 1 million paces through soil where 10 million had bled to death or had their lives totally wrecked in the effort of trying to build a path to peace. He was an extraordinary, visionary young man. And so, no, but it is by building understanding, building bridges with each other. I think maybe not rushing myself to condemn other people, to understand why they did things, that we have the best hope for humanity. And that's exactly why I wrote the book. And the Western Front Way now is the world's biggest commemoration project. Everyone can walk it or cycle it. It's going to become like the Northern Camino. I think it was the best idea to come out of the First World War, Piers, even though it categorically hasn't ended the Second World War, didn't stop the Second World War, and won't. But what other hope is there unless we just walk together, respect our difference, and indeed love each other for our differences?
Which is an inclusive mentality, by the way, just so you know.
Well, I think
on
we've
that
respected each other's differences.
Thank you.
I wouldn't go as far as say we love each other yet, but the
Almost.
night is young.
Almost.
The night is young.
We're working
Sir Anthony Selden, great to see you. Iman Aiton, thank you very much for coming in. I appreciate it.